Coming up on Nebraska Stories, Willa Cather takes her place in National Statuary Hall. Family, football, and love in Memorial Stadium. The Kentfield twins and a passion for petrified wood. And an amateur filmmaker's cosmic playground.
And here we are walking to the Capitol, and it was a perfect day. It was beautiful. The sky was blue with clouds. But we saw the dome and the fountains and all of it, and it was just this entering this beautiful space. It was just gorgeous. We walked through the main hall, the hall opened up, and there were photographers from all around the world there. The place was packed.
Sculptor Littleton Alston arrives in Statuary Hall on the second floor of the U.S. Capitol on the most thrilling day of his professional career. His 7-foot bronze of Nebraska writer Willa Cather is hidden under cloth. Today, she'll be unveiled for the world to see.
Her novels, her writing, her presence, her influence. I think that's what makes her great. Telling a story about our nation through her characters in a way that allows all of us, even today, to connect, to feel a sense of connectedness to the past. We're nothing if we don't understand our past. We're nothing if we don't have artists who understand that.
What would Willa Cather think of the recent past, when protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol and moved through Statuary Hall on their way to challenge the U.S. election?
Unbelievable. Yeah, we are televising the breach.
Listen, you can't get through with a hairbrush that's metal. How do they get through with a flagpole?
That's right, we own it. We own you.
2.5 years have passed. The physical evidence of the insurrection is gone as Willa Cather prepares to take her place in Statuary Hall.
I know you're excited, but I'm more excited because this is the first statue I get to do as being speaker. You know, every state sends 2 statues of extraordinary citizens to the U.S. Capitol to represent them in Washington. By law, the statues have to be made of bronze or marble. But make no mistake, the men and women we honor here are living symbols who represent our national memory, our patriotism, and our shared American creed. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one.
It was 2019 when Littleton Alston was chosen from among 70 artists to create a bronze of Nebraska's world-famous author. He began by listening to her books and looking at her many portraits.
I look at each of the images and just to sort of get a sense of her, but also just to make sure that because I sculpt from the inside out, that everything is there. So I'm not making a doll. I'm actually making a human form. There are times when you're sculpting a form that's moving through space, there are a lot of dynamics going on. You may not recognize it as just a viewer, but to the artist, there's 1,000 things happening, and you're trying to orchestrate all of that. And there are days in which I would go in and make changes and think, oh, I've got it. Oh yeah, that's it. And then I'd go home and come back in the morning and go, oh no, that's not it. That was most frustrating.
Alston unveiled the first version of his statue in Willa Cather's hometown of Red Cloud, Nebraska.
I look at the maquette as a poem, and then I look at the 4-foot version as a short story. And then the 7-foot, which will be in bronze of Willa in Statuary Hall, will be the novel.
The next time he unveiled Willa Cather in his Omaha studio, she had changed. Members of the Willa Cather National Statuary Hall Selection Committee were impressed. The poem has become the short story.
I wanted to capture that wind surrounding her and her vision. Also, I put in around her the memories of Nebraska. So there's the wagon wheel and the arc of the wheel here as well as here. And then the cane coming up with her pen and her writings. So she's striding forward into history.
I like this better than that. I liked that when I saw
Yes.
it in Red Cloud.
Yes.
But this is less matronly.
Yes.
And I like that because she doesn't need to be portrayed matronly. She needs to be alive, and I love the look on her face, like she is thinking and she is looking ahead. It's quite moving.
Finally, at a foundry in Colorado, Alston supervises the finishing touches on his vision of Willa Cather, the novel.
It's like an adrenaline rush, and it's beautiful to see it. The heat and the fire and just the way in which it becomes almost a primal emergence of a form, doesn't it? It's just astonishing. It's almost like we're pulling it out of this cradle, right? And it's just, it's coming alive right in front of you.
After that, Willa had to go into storage. She was ready, but Statuary Hall was not. It would be almost 2 years before Congress was prepared to dedicate another statue to the collection. By the time Willa Cather joined the Hall of Statues, it was the 150th anniversary of her birth.
We ready? Yep. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Littleton, she is beautiful. Willa is stepping forward, just like you told us she would. Thank you. Cather's vivid, reflective writing has become synonymous with the pioneer spirit of Nebraska.
Littleton Alston's bronze statue on its granite pedestal stands 10 feet tall and weighs nearly 1,200 pounds. The gold inscription on the front reads, Nebraska, Willa Cather, author, 1873 to 1947. And as she wrote in her novel, O Pioneers, the history of every country begins in the heart of a man or a woman.
There was a sense that a lot of things had come full circle. And I feel as though I've been lifted onto a carpet and just sort of flown around. It was really beautiful.
Littleton Alston is the first African American to create a statue for the collection. His Willa Cather replaces J. Sterling Morton, founder of Arbor Day, who was also a fervent supporter of slavery. 4 years earlier, Nebraska replaced a bronze of orator and politician William Jennings Bryan with chief standing bear of the Ponca tribe, whose famous courtroom battle established Native Americans as persons under the law.
I think Nebraska is more than you think. I think the people of Nebraska are so diverse and so independent in so many ways that you'll be surprised at what you'll find. And I think that that's the great strength of Nebraska. We are capable of always accepting others who are on that journey in trying to find a home, and also inviting them into the home of Nebraska and letting them understand and appreciate what it is to be a part of this. And I think on that day of the dedication, we were unified, all of us, and it was joyous.
Memorial Stadium's status in Nebraska is unquestionable. A true touchstone of the state. The stadium has become intertwined in the lives of Nebraskans. Memorial Stadium's ability to connect goes beyond the playing field.
The very first day we met, we both loved Nebraska football. And our kids love Nebraska football.
My mom. Denny and Joyce Kornick have a unique connection to the stadium that brought the two of them together.
My father bought 2 tickets in 1929 during the Depression on the 50-yard line halfway up in the West Stadium. I think he paid 50 cents. That's 90-some years that those seats have been sat in by my father's relatives.
I signed this 1954. My number is 31. Memorial Stadium to me is probably more important to many people because I ended up playing here. I did not only play football, but I also played baseball for the University of Nebraska. In football, I was an offensive running back, right and left halfback. And during that time that I was playing, we ended up having to play defense also, going both ways.
Happenstance would bring the two of them together later in life through a love of the University of Nebraska. The couple, who reside in Florida, travel back to the stadium for each home game.
My son is a retired pilot for Southwest Airlines, which allows us to fly as parents. So we have no excuses. We can fly back and see a game and fly back to Florida. We don't miss games.
Denny and Joyce have seen the stadium and team evolve over the years. Their passion and dedication to all things Nebraska shows no signs of stopping.
Listen, never coming back to a game as long as I can walk and talk and drive and steer and ride a horse. What? I will be coming back for Nebraska football. To me, this stadium is a shrine to all of Nebraska. Yeah. End of story.
I can be so proud that this beautiful stadium has added on very gracefully. My compliments not so much to the concrete, but to the people that sit on that concrete in that stadium. We have the best fans in the whole world.
I'm Harvey Kenfield. I'm Howard Kenfield. We're both 93 years old.
Twin brothers that are 93 that have the same hobby and have had the same hobby all their life. They've always been together. They were together in Korea, and then after that they started collecting, and they wanted a hobby that was free because they didn't have a lot of money.
We started collecting Indian artifacts. We were quite interested in that. A friend of ours, he says, while you're picking up arrowheads, pick up the pretty rocks. So we got started hunting the South Platte River for petrified wood.
The Kenfields returned home from the war and bought land near the town of Ogallala, where they built 2 identical houses and put a shed out back to house their hobby. 23 years later, in 1976, the first Ogallala Petrified Wood Gallery was born.
And they have stepchildren and had no place to really hand this down to. So in 2007, we established a foundation. We have visiting artists in our hallway, and then we have the exhibit that Howard and Harvey have put together, as well as Native American artifacts that were brought in by various people in our community. And so we're hoping for the future of the gallery that it will always be here, and Howard and Harvey want it located in Ogallala, and that's the agreement that we made with them. They are special men, very humble men, and very talented.
Howard and Harvey's talents grew from collecting artifacts and stones to creating art with a very unique medium.
I believe I like the music boxes probably the best.
We go to shows and sometimes we get ideas, come home and start making some replicas. The music boxes, there was a calendar with a grist mill in it, so Harvey was able to take time to set it up and make one like it. I've got one up front in memory of my stepdaughter that passed away, and it was a grist mill, and it plays down by the old mill stream. Turned out great, so we continue to make different buildings we've seen as we travel. We take small pieces of wood that no color or nothing, and we build a framework. We use the Elmer's glue, and it dries clear. We had to put openings for doors and windows, and then we put the siding on, put the windows in, and little cross pieces in the windows. It was kind of hard. The windmill is awful hard to get them blades positioned right.
Steady hands, careful eyes, and a lifetime of patience has led the Kenfields to some incredible finds.
There is a piece of swamp bog that's blue in color that is just debris that's gone to the bottom of the swamp and fossilized, and it's probably my favorite piece of petrified wood.
The Eden Valley wood, they were small pieces, and we glued some together to make a tree branch. We have one case of gemstone butterflies. There's about 30 in there. And we also made, with an Eden Valley wood, made some little toadstools.
And speaking of stools,
it could be what it is. Most anything will petrify as long as the conditions are right. So this is one of the samples.
They've got a good sense of humor.
Another one is the outhouse. We call it Lonergan naturally.
And, naturally, the twins want their collection to continue to amaze and inspire.
We gave this collection to the community, and the community has been very supportive of our work. It's word of mouth mainly, to visit the gallery. They They say that's the best collection they've ever seen. And it's the highlight of their trip. One young lady from North Platte stopped here. She said this is the #1 spot to visit in Nebraska. So we kind of agree with her. We hope through volunteers that we can continue to keep this open to the public at all times. And it's a collection you won't see anywhere else. And so we're quite proud of that.
What drew me to filmmaking was when Star Trek came out and Lost in Space. They were such fantastic TV series about space.
Bill Hedges loves sci-fi movies, so much that he's built his own spaceship set in his basement.
I try to keep the upstairs fairly normal looking. I figured downstairs I can, go wild, and that's what I did. I bought this book called The Making of Star Trek, and it detailed all of how, everything about how Star Trek was made, all the behind-the-scenes stuff. It had blueprints in there, how the stages were designed. So I can switch from day to night in here.
Hedges grew up on a farm outside Lyons. As a kid, he came to town for movies at the local theater.
Back in the 60s, the theater was a popular place for people to hang out, especially in a small town. That was the place to go on, Saturday nights, because that was before there was television. People would get their news from newsreels. I got a job here as a projectionist at the theater when I was 13, and I worked here, through high school, which was kind of a fun job to have. My favorite film was The Absent-Minded Professor. For graduation, my folks gave me a Kodak Super 8 movie camera, and I used that to make some little shorts, a lot of stop frame animation movies, and that was the start of my amateur filmmaking career. My folks gave me this.
After high school, Hedges served in the Navy and worked in the Fremont Post Office. He kept making home movies. But in 1985, the Lyons Theater closed.
I hated to see it disappear because it was such a source of entertainment for me, and being as I worked there too.
So Hedges bought as much of it as he could and built a home theater in his basement as an homage.
I had a lot of beach movies, spy movies back then, westerns, comedies. Well, this is some of the things I had saved from the Lyons Theater. So I used to go through these very same doors.
In 2014, the old Lyons Theater building came up for sale. He bought it. In the last couple years, Hedges has turned the old theater from a place designed to show movies into a place to make them.
In Nebraska, it's just all cornfields and rolling hills, so I had to make my own alien planet here. It's an incredible playground for an amateur filmmaker to have the facilities to film anything here. I can have just to have the space to actually build sets and miniatures is something I could never do at home. This is my stage 2, and I built a ancient ruins set in here.
He's built sets for films he plans to make, including a new series co-starring his cat.
Basically about me and my cat and adventures in space, meeting other aliens, and it's going to be kind of a parody, not a serious sci-fi, but I have about 12 episodes written so far, so. To match between the different scenes, this is a miniature of me and my cat in there, which also matches the interior of that spaceship and also the interior of my set in my basement. Still got to add the plexiglass to the window, though.
He builds props out of all kinds of things, many of them scavenged.
My series is going to have a lot of parodies in here, and one of them is from The Good and the Bad and the Ugly.
But it's not all sci-fi sets.
This is the original lobby, and I tried
He's
to
restored part of the building to how it used to be, even reinstalling the original film projectors upstairs. This building lets Hedges tie past to present, making movies in the very space that cultivated his love of the art.
Other people in town seem to appreciate it too, because I get people asking for tours of it once in a while, which is fun to talk to them too, because they just share their memories of coming here and they point out things that they remember. So it's nice to preserve a little bit of that.
And he's never lost his childhood love of movie making. In 2015, he created a film about the history of lions. Now, he's working on training his cat for his next project.
Okay, hop down. Okay, high five. High five me, he'll jump up on my shoulder, so I'm trying to train him to come and, stop, hit his mark. If you want to get a lot of views on YouTube, all you have to do is put a cat on the internet and you're automatically guaranteed an audience there. Cats in space, I think that's a winning combination.
Watch more Nebraska Stories on our website, Facebook, and YouTube. Nebraska Stories is funded in part by the Margaret and Martha Thomas Foundation.